Okay, two things before we start. I remember the very first time that I ever saw Scramble. I do remember it. Second, there was a time from the years 1983 until 1986 where I could play Scramble almost every day if I wanted to, and it wasn't at an arcade or a convenience store or anything. You want to find out how I did that? You'll have to wait to the end of the video. To fully understand what made Scramble stand out so much, compared to other games back in 1981, you have to look at the competition of the same era. Arcade games were a blast to play, but at the same time, it was the kingdom of the single-screen games. The world was mesmerized by descending alien formations of space invaders and the relentless swarms of Galaga. We were navigating the haunted mazes of Pac-Man and scaling the girders on Donkey Kong. Those two games proved that characters could be even more fun than just shooting everything. These games were all incredible, but they were also trapped on one single unchanging screen. The very concept of a scrolling world was still in its infancy. Now in 1981, the same year as Scramble, Williams Electronics did release the legendary Defender. And Defender was a huge deal, giving players a ship that could fly freely across a vast looping landscape. But here's the key difference: control. In Defender, the world only moved when you did. You could fly left, you could fly right, you could stop, you could hover. The pace was entirely in your own hands. Well, except when you took too long and the Vader showed up, then it became hellish, but I digress. It was a side-scroller, sure, but it wasn't the genre we know today. Meanwhile, a Japanese company named Konami was just finding its feet. Founded in 1969 as a jukebox rental business, they had only jumped into making arcade games a few years earlier. They had seen some moderate success with titles like Astro Invader, but were still hunting for that one monster hit that would put them on the global stage. They were about to find it by taking the idea of scrolling and flipping on its head. Instead of giving the player freedom to explore, they would take that freedom away, creating a sense of relentless forward momentum that would change everything. So in March of 1981, new cabinets started showing up in North American arcades. One particular game that was licensed by Stern Electronics was a Konami game called Scramble. At first glance, it just looked like any other space shooter. You controlled a small ship called a jet in the game with two buttons. One fired a forward cannon, and one dropped a bomb, or actually it was two bombs at a time, that dropped in an arc to hit targets below. But the moment you dropped it at quarter in, you realized this was something entirely new. The screen began moving, and it never ever stopped. This was Scramble's first and most important innovation: forced scrolling. Unlike Defender, you couldn't turn back, you couldn't stop to catch your breath. The game was constantly pushing you forward into danger. This one simple change had a huge psychological effect. It wasn't about clearing a screen anymore, it was about surviving a journey. Every second brought a new threat to navigate. The game was fast, breathless, and could be incredibly tense. But Scramble didn't just have an endlessly scrolling landscape. It was the first side-scroller shooter to feature multiple distinct levels, taking you on a structured mission. You'd start over rolling terrain with rocket launchers, then dive into a cavern swarming with UFOs. You'd navigate fiery meteor showers, weave through a cityscape, and finally navigate treacherous tunnels to reach the enemy base. This concept of discrete stages would become a fundamental pillar of the entire genre. But Konami wasn't done. They added another strategic layer that was practically unheard of back then: resource management. At the bottom of the screen was a constantly depleting fuel gauge. To replenish it, you had to destroy fuel tanks scattered across the ground. All of a sudden, you weren't just shooting enemies, you were making critical decisions in a split second. Do I risk diving for that fuel tank, or do I focus on incoming UFOs? Running out of fuel meant your ship crashed, game over. This added an incredible layer of urgency that separated Scramble from every other shooter on the market. A dual weapon system, forced scrolling, distinct levels, and resource management. In one cabinet, Konami had just written the rulebook for an entire genre. The impact was immediate. Scramble was Konami's first major international hit. In the United States alone, it sold over 15,000 arcade cabinets within 5 months, a staggering number for the time. Its place in history was literally minted on a token for the 1982 World's Fair alongside Titans Pac-Man and Space Invaders. The industry took notice, and Konami themselves quickly released a more difficult sequel called Super Cobra that same year, using the same core mechanics. But Scramble's real legacy isn't in its own sales numbers. It's in the DNA of the games that came after it. Fast forward 4 years to 1985, and Konami releases Gradius, a game that would become synonymous with a side-scrolling shooter. But here's the secret. Gradius was originally conceived as a direct follow-up to Scramble. When you play them side by side, the DNA is undeniable. The forced scrolling, the perilous terrain, the need to bomb ground targets while shooting aerial ones. It's all there. Gradius refined the formula, adding its iconic power-up bar, but the foundation it was built on was pure Scramble. So if Scramble was such a massive hit, and its influence is so clear, why has it been largely forgotten? Why do we celebrate Gradius as the pioneer while its ancestor sits in relative obscurity? The biggest reason really comes down to where you played it. Scramble was a giant in the arcades, but a ghost on home consoles. Unlike Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, which got huge ports for the Atari 2600 that put them in millions of homes, Scramble never made that same leap. It did see official releases on more niche platforms like the Vectrex and the Tommy Tutor, but for the vast majority of kids playing on the era's most popular consoles, it simply didn't exist. Unauthorized clones with the same name on computers like the Commodore 64 only served to dilute the brand. Its legacy therefore became a mechanical one, not a commercial one. Developers built upon its ideas, but players at home built their nostalgia around the games that were readily available to them. By the time console technology caught up to the arcade experience, the genre had moved on. Gradius and R-Type became the new standard bearers, and the game that started it all was relegated to a historical footnote. It became a game developer's game, a title whose influence far outstripped its name recognition. A game doesn't need to be remembered to be important. Every side-scrolling shooter you've ever played owes a debt to that 1981 Konami classic. The relentless forward momentum, the thrill of navigating a collapsing cavern, the desperate dive for a fuel tank, the satisfaction of that final bombing run on an enemy base, all of it began with Scramble. It didn't just add a new feature to an existing formula, it created an entirely new language for action games. It was a blueprint, the original draft, the game that secretly wrote the rules for a genre only to watch its children take all the credit. It's a forgotten pioneer, but a pioneer nonetheless, and a crucial piece of video game history that deserves to be remembered. Scramble is a perfect example of a game whose influence is way bigger than its fame. Okay, I remember seeing Scramble for the first time at Looney's skating rink in Montgomery, Alabama, where I grew up. It was a skating rink that all the kids, whether you were 6 years old all the way up to high school age kids, went to go roller skate, and they had a good selection of video games in there. But I remember seeing it and watching the older kids play it, but I didn't play it initially, but I just watched it. Now, how did I play the game from 83 to 86 almost any time I wanted to? You're not going to believe this, but back in those days we called it junior high, not middle school, but at Brubaker Junior High School, in the gymnasium, in the little snack machine area, we had 3 arcade games. We had Omega Race, we had Defender, and we had Scramble, all 3 of those. And so it wasn't uncommon for somebody to be playing it in that little, you go in there for PE, and there's just a few minutes where you're goofing off or whatever, around lunchtime, and we would play it a lot. So it was really cool to have those. I remember when I noticed it, I was actually, the very first day in 7th grade, I was, just playing basketball with a bunch of kids and everything, and there was a window that you could see through, the snack area, and I saw the cabinet, like the side of it, and I was like, oh man, and I just had to go check it out. And one other thing, we talked earlier in the video about how there weren't really any ports for Scramble back in the old days, but recently, in fact last year, CollectorVision Games released a port for the ColecoVision. That box looks great, doesn't it? And it's got some video down here I'll show you real quick. It actually looks nice. Very, very nice. And now the other one that I'll show you is for the Atari 2600. It was released by Champ Games, and Champ Games is just awesome. I mean, they put out so many cool games for the 2600, and this port of Scramble is no exception. It's got all the levels just like the arcade. It's not like the old days on 2600 where sometimes you wouldn't get all the levels, like on Gorf you didn't. You know, you get all the levels. It's the full package, and a very good adaptation. But anyway, Champ Games, check them out. They've got lots of cool stuff for the 2600. Okay, so what are your memories of Scramble? Did you play it when it first came out? Are you that old like me? Or did you maybe play it through emulation later? Are you a younger person? I'd love to hear from y'all. I love it whenever y'all make comments and get involved with the videos. So please, let me know in the comments what you think about Scramble the game. I think it's a classic. Like, subscribe, share. Later!